I would like to welcome you to our webinar on learning about new student orientation in the era of the distributed campus. New student orientation is one of the most vital experiences to a student's success, and as it may be one of the first times they're ever stepping on your campus, or the experience might entirely be virtual, something we've never seen before. Our featured speakers for today are Matt Wilmore, Senior Director of Product Marketing at Modo, and today we have three wonderful folks sharing their story from the University of Southern Mississippi. Today joining us we have Valerie Craig, the Manager of Technology Application Services, Amanda Rester, Web Application Developer, and Laura Laughlin, Director of Orientation and Transition Programs.
Great, thank you, Chris. And again, thank you everyone for taking some time out of your day to spend it with us and talk about NSO in this era of a distributed campus. Like Chris said, my name is Matt Wilmore. I am the Senior Director of Product Marketing here at Modo. Prior to Modo, I've been at Modo for about 3 years. Prior to this, I was at the University of Notre Dame for about 7 years. Part of my time there was spent as the Mobile ND Program Manager, where I stood up and built out the ND mobile app, which is based on Modo, and also have some of my favorite memories during my time at Notre Dame, building out NSO experiences and talking with new students and their families as they spend their first days on campus as new students. It's incredibly exciting. Obviously a very different time this year for NSO, but hoping to spend some time with you today to talk about what that means, how you can take advantage of it, and really I want to spend as much time as possible with our speakers from the University of Southern Mississippi, Valerie, Amanda, and Laura. So what we're going to do today is really break this up into three main parts. First, we're going to talk about what does this distributed NSO experience actually mean? What does that mean when we say distributed? Then I'm going to kick it over to Southern Mississippi and have them talk about how they're actually doing this using their Modo app and some tips that you can take away for your own NSO experience. We'll then bring it back and talk about some best practices that you can take today for your own distributed NSO experience. And then we'll close by talking about some takeaways and some Modo resources that you have at your disposal when thinking about your own campus NSO experience, both this year and in the future. So I wanted to start by talking about a distributed NSO experience and really what that means and what makes this different from prior years. Now, some of this is pretty obvious. We have a global pandemic that we're all dealing with, and at the same time, we're trying to reconvene millions of students around the world to come and experience higher education. How do we balance that? And how do we balance an NSO experience, which is really one of the most important aspects of the first year student experience? So there's a very obvious difference about distributed NSO experience, which is that there's no guarantee that attendees are actually there on campus. And if you had gone back 5 years and talked to your NSO or your orientation leadership and said, hey, imagine we were doing this, but we didn't know if people were actually here. You have to do everything about NSO, but the people may actually not be in front of you. You'd probably get laughed at because that's just an absurd thing that people would not be there for NSO, but yet this is what we're dealing with. Now, not every school is facing this. We know a lot of our customers at Modo are bringing back people for the fall semester. Some are doing virtual NSO or distributed NSO. Some are doing it just in person. Some are doing both. So there's a wide variety of NSO experiences, more so than ever, that will be conducted this year across the world. But this lack of guarantee that people are actually in front of you makes things, of course, very different. Because of this and because of how the content is made available to those attendees, this means that the content consumption by those users and their families is more time distributed and asynchronous. Previously, as people came to campus for an NSO experience, there's typically a schedule, people know where to be, there's a place they're supposed to be at a certain time, and you have that opportunity to talk with that captive audience, even if it's for 15 or 30 minutes. If a distributed NSO experience means that they're not really in front of you, the way and the time and the rate at which they consume that content that you put out there is much different. And we need to account for how that content is consumed, as well as the fact that they may not consume it all in one sittings like they might have in an in-campus or an on-campus NSO experience. And that actually brings us to our next challenge, which is that maintaining the attention of remote users may be a challenge if you have basically a video equivalent of what your on-campus NSO experience would be. Now, I'm making, of course, a big assumption that people were actually paying attention during the on-campus NSO experience. But this is especially challenging now that you may be delivering videos, PowerPoint presentations, even some live sessions over things like Zoom or Microsoft Teams. But there's not really a guarantee that the people on the other end are paying attention in the same manner that they might have been on campus. So it's not to say that this is something that's dead on arrival. It's just something where we have to really consider how people are going to consume that content and make sure the content is really well structured to fit that format. This does, however, bring about new opportunities for us, especially not only the main campus and the main NSO experience, but other groups and departments that may have had trouble connecting with students in the past. And I think about some of the smaller, more specific, more interest-based groups on campus, which really look to NSO as a place to find new club members, new people who are interested perhaps in a student employment position. But because of the strains of the NSO schedule, there may not be time to do that. Or somebody who's interested in going to a club like Hillel, as an example, to learn more about that, is competing with 4 other things of interest to them happening at the same time over, let's say, a 2 or 3 day NSO period. So there's these challenges with scheduling. Having a distributed NSO experience means that somebody could have all those at least distributed interactions with the different clubs or the groups, different departments that they may be interested in studying. They can, because it's time shifted, they can actually learn about those at their own pace, as opposed to having to look at their schedule and decide what they're not going to attend. There's also some new challenges here in terms of community building. One of the great things about higher education institutions is that everybody is there for the same purpose, and they're sitting close to each other, and they're exchanging ideas, and they're talking, sometimes in the middle of the day in the courtyard, sometimes in the middle of the night in the hallway of the dorm. With COVID-19 and needing to socially distance, that is all very much in danger of not being true this year. And so besides that, there are challenges just in terms of building community as a campus. If your students are in fact starting their fall semester remote and not coming onto the campus until perhaps later in the semester or not until the spring, how do you build that community virtually such that when they come onto campus, it is a continuation of what they've been doing and not something where they're starting over and having the remote versus the in-person campus experience? And the elephant in the room is these evolving health and safety guidelines that campuses need to abide by to make sure that the COVID-19 pandemic does not spread further because people happen to be on campus. So how do you ensure that students who are often away from home for the first time and looking to make new friendships and have this tendency to gather and to talk and to collect, how do you make sure that they actually stick to these guidelines? And we're able to have not only a campus that's here to learn, but remains safe during that process. So a lot of things that are different that we need to consider when talking about a distributed NSO experience. Now with that, there are things luckily that are the same and things that we don't want to forget about for our distributed NSO experience. The first of which being that it is still incumbent upon us to put our best foot forward as an institution. This is where you want to get things off to a great start, get people in the right mindset that they're here to learn, here to connect, here to grow personally and intellectually and as a society. That still remains. So we don't want to forget that. In addition, there's still going to be these questions. What do I do? How do I sign up? Who do I talk to? How do I pay my bills? All these things that are going to come up during NSO are going to happen even if it's a distributed NSO, and perhaps more questions because things are just different this year. So answering those questions during the sessions, whether they're pre-recorded or live, how do you actually answer that? And how do you make sure those answers are available 2 months from now? And I always think about my experiences doing NSO, and you have those captive few minutes where you're talking to a student and their family, and that's really perhaps sometimes the only time during their entire 4 years or more that you have that captive audience. So you have to get as much as you can sort of into their head before they walk away. But a lot of times they'll have a question about something that doesn't really surface during that moment or even during that weekend, but it may be in the middle of October, they'll suddenly remember, where is the post office? I need to grab a package. I have no idea where this is. I know they talked about it back in August, but I don't remember. So where do they get even random mundane questions asked or answered mid-semester, especially if they're a remote student and not able to walk up to the main building or the student center and get that question answered? How do you answer that? That is the same question as before. It's just a little bit different in the distributed experience. How do you complete those must-have tasks? Things need to be done. There's always a checklist for everybody that comes on campus, whether it's completing forms or choosing housing or meeting a roommate or talking with the advisor or choosing your classes. All these things that need to happen still need to happen, even if you're not there. Or maybe you are there and there's still just a different way in which it needs to be done. So those still need to happen. Stepping back a little bit, we want to make sure that everybody has really the confidence for what they need to do next. You know, NSO is this weekend. I think of it like a go-kart track. All the go-karts are lined up and the people are in there and they're ready to go. And somebody walks behind and sort of pulls that motor and gets kicked off, and they sort of push them off and they say, here, go that direction. This is what NSO is. You're starting that go-kart and sort of pushing them off in the right direction. And then you really hope that they know what to do next and they can at least follow the guidelines. This is the same thing. How do we get people sort of geared up and off to the races? And if they do get stuck, where do they go for help? That's the same question as we've had to answer in past years. Of course, reassuring families that they're in the right place. You know, a lot of them are likely coming in with hesitation. Geez, should I really be investing this type of money? These are things that we talked about during the admitted student experience webinar, where it's a battle of heart and minds. If you're on that, this is still the same here, where we need to continually reassure these families and the students that yes, this is absolutely the right place for you to be, and you are in good company, and this is going to be fantastic. So we want to keep that reassurance up. And then we want to make sure that we set the right tone and the mindset for the semester, like I talked about earlier. This is that weekend or these set of days where we have to really put people's heads on right and say, all right, here is your mission for the next 8 or 16 weeks. Go for it and go forth and do great things. So as with past years for NSO, we want to set that mindset for the semester. So there's just some things to think about, both things that were just different last year or then last year, and the things that have been the same pretty much every year, maybe just with a little different twist in this post-COVID-19 timeline. So with that, I wanted to pass it over to our friends at the University of Southern Mississippi to talk about what they are actually doing. So I call this sort of app in action. This is not just, here's what Moto says you could do. This is what they are actually doing today, and I'm really excited to have them join us today. So right now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass that over to the team at Southern Mississippi.
Hello, this is Valerie Craig from the University of Southern Mississippi. We'd like to talk to you today about how we're planning orientation for 2020. And just as you are trying to plan, you're fixing the airplane while it's flying in the air, we're doing the same thing. We're getting changes week by week. And we like to show you where we are today. It could change by the time we go live with it, but we'd like to share some of our ideas with you. When a student is contacted and asked to download the iSouthern Miss application, the first thing they're going to be presented with is a list of personas. And we're going to advise them to select the freshman orientation student persona, because this is where they're going to live while they're going through their transition into the university and going through orientation. You'll see we have 4 new personas for orientation. We have freshman student, freshman family, transfer student, and transfer family. And the benefit of having these different personas is being able to provide unique content and to be able to do push notifications and communicate with these specific groups of people. And so when the student selects their persona, they'll then be placed into their orientation freshman student persona. And I wanted to talk at this point about our plan. I wanted you to understand that orientation is not where the app will stop. The app will take them through their entire time at the university. The students will be moved through orientation freshman student into a Golden Eagle welcome week. And what that week looks like is still being worked on. That's a week that students come into campus, They have some really fun events. And so that's one that's really important to be in person, but we're working on making sure, as Matt mentioned, that we meet all the guidelines for the students. After that first week, we'll transfer them and transition them into their new student and retention program persona. This is where they're going to live for their first year at the university, and we can give them information that they need to get them through that first year. And then once they make it through, we're going to move them into the current student persona, and that's where they come into I'll call it the regular student persona and application, where they have access to everything they need to be successful as a student. The flow below that is for family members. So they'll come into orientation, and then they'll be moved into a parent and family programs persona, where we can give them content and we can send notifications to them about their students and what to expect for their students, and especially events that happen throughout the year for them. The final persona where they'll be transitioned into is into our alumni and friends, where they can get information about what's going on campus throughout the year and throughout the 4 or 5 years that their student will be at the university. When the student gets into the freshman student orientation persona, this is what they're going to see. They're going to get a little intro, a hero image. Are you ready to go gold this fall? They'll get an information fair area where they can go and take a look at some things. This is what takes the place of the walking around from table to table, because we have decided this year that everything will be virtual. So there will be no students on campus for orientation. We have a before, a during, and an after. So things that students need to do in each area. And then we have social media, and then we cap it off. And we can talk to you about what we did in the app, but we thought it was important for you to know our thinking related to orientation and transition programs from the person who actually has to make all this happen. And we wanted Laura Laughlin to come and talk to you today. She's not an IT person like we are. We are the people who put the information into the application and we make it work. But we really want Laura to talk to you about the orientation itself. So I'd like to pass it off to Laura now and let her talk to you.
Thanks, Valerie. Yes, I'll start by saying that we had intentions pre-COVID to house all of our orientation information and agendas inside of the app. And so we had already started some work with our IT folks to make this happen. So it was really helpful when we had to fully and virtually switch to some online platforms to deliver our orientation content. And so we're very thankful for that team that made that happen. One of the drivers behind us wanting to use the app in the first place was the persona options that Valerie was just mentioning. So I do want to highlight that a little bit further. An issue we've ran into as an institution is the ability to succinctly and effectively communicate with students, even beyond orientation, so throughout their years on campus. And after some conversations, we realized the app was a good way to do that and was severely underutilized. So really the use of the app was born out of trying to figure out how we could communicate with students throughout the regular academic term. So by having students kind of their first touch point being through the app during orientation, we're getting students and family members accustomed to it so that we can end up using the app beyond just the orientation agenda. So the benefit really is twofold. It's throughout our orientation experience, and it's once students are flipped over into that current student persona and family members are flipped over into that current family persona. So I'll kind of go into what Valerie was saying, an orientation overview. 2 weeks prior to an orientation session, all of our sessions are now one-day sessions in July. 2 weeks before those sessions, our students will begin receiving a series of communication via their USM email account and their personal email account. and then closer to their sessions by phone call and text messages from their individual orientation leader. Some of those emails that they'll begin to receive 2 weeks out will point them to a couple of different places to start taking in their virtual content. Valerie, if you don't mind, if you'll switch over to the website. So we have content, of course, in the app, which we'll talk about, but it was also important that we had that content mimicked on our website. So those email messages that will go out to students and families are going to direct folks by link to this website. This is a test website, but one of the things we wanted to do first on that page, once they're directed to our website, is to introduce the app. So we still want students to get in the app, to download it, for families to do the same thing. But it was important that the content remained in both places. The content allows those emails to direct folks to the website, and it is usable information for students that might not have access to a smartphone. So if you scroll down, the first thing they really see is the information about the iSouthern app. And if you keep going, you'll see sort of that same layout that Valerie already alluded to. It's very natural before virtual orientation, during virtual orientation, and then after virtual orientation. And then as you get a little bit further, you'll see how we also will provide those information fair videos on the website as well. So you can flip back over to the app, Valerie. So it was important that that content exists in both places. It was also important to us as we started working with iTech that one of the very first things we talked about was the need for the content in the app to mimic the information visually that students have already received from the university. We think it's important that that flow makes sense to the student, regardless of the office that's creating that content. So students will visually in the app see familiar images, familiar designs that they've received in their information, in their admissions information, and on the admissions website prior to their interactions with the orientation office. So we're really splitting out our content in before virtual orientation, during virtual orientation, and after virtual orientation. The before orientation checklist that you see right here is really that. It's designed to make sure students have taken care of those kind of final enrollment pieces. These to-do list items are steps that they've been communicated about in a number of different ways. The app has given us the ability to be more specific about these to-do list items. If you eventually, once our website's live, you'll see that there's not as much detail on our website because it looks really clunky, but the app lets us kind of seamlessly explain these to-do list items for new students. That final bullet point you see there on the before virtual orientation checklist is one we'll talk about next. That is the information fair videos. So we started working earlier this summer with offices all over campus, and we have about 30 or 32 information fair videos. So like Valerie said, it gives us the opportunity to mimic that experience that students and families have when they're walking around the information fair tables and they get kind of an elevator spiel, elevator pitch from whichever office they have interest in. The nice thing about this format, as we talked about earlier on in the session, is that students can digest this information at their own pace. You'll see what that information fair is going to look like in the app. So we have some really good icons that iTech's created for us to make it visually appealing and make it feel less like the students drinking out of a fire hydrant, but really gets to have time that 2 weeks in advance of their session to think through what offices they want to learn more about, to introduce them to offices they didn't know they needed to learn information about. And so all of those icons link to YouTube videos that students will be able to watch at their own pace prior to their actual orientation session. This is a list of lengthier orientation videos that will also be in the app and linked on our website. This distinct from the information fair videos, these videos are a little lengthier and are designed to replicate more like the presentations a student would experience at an in-person session. So when I say lengthier, 15 to 20 minutes, and are going to be designed to sort of give that detailed information that we really want to make sure students walk away from the orientation experience having. The welcome from our university president is going to be sent via email, as will that student success video towards the end. So that'll come in a little bit different format, but those 3 middle videos will be lengthier presentations that will be linked on the website and in the app for students to watch. That final step has a little less to do with the app, but I'll talk about it just in the overall virtual orientation experience. We're working really closely with our undergraduate advisement center and our units across campus to do some really extensive pre-course registration work in those 2 weeks prior to the virtual orientation session. So our academic advisors will be doing personal outreach to students ahead of their session to really make sure they understand what their degree plan is, to make sure that they're already starting to think about what classes they'll want to take that first semester and how to fit them into their schedule. So really on their actual virtual orientation day, they're doing a little bit more finalizing of their schedule and really having more of what we think of as an academic advising appointment. So learning about what it means to be a member of that particular college, what expectations are going to be like moving forward, what they could expect classes to be like, particularly this fall. So that complete pre-course registration step is really engaging with academic advisors as they start to reach out to them before their orientation session. So the actual day of our virtual orientation session, I'll reiterate a point that was made earlier. It was really important for us that the actual orientation experience not be burdensome to students who might not have easy access to technology or be able to rely on sort of being in a Zoom call or a Teams call from 8 to 5 on their actual orientation session. So we really tried to think through what is the most important thing that they need during that actual day. So the actual sessions they'll attend on their virtual orientation day are limited to a small group session with their orientation leader and about 10 other new students, which will happen the first thing in the morning from 8:30 to 10. And then we're going to have throughout the rest of the day, schedule confirmation waves is what we were calling those. So within those conversations with academic advisors ahead of time, that student will be told which wave on their orientation day. They'll sort of be in community with other students in their major, learn about the expectations of their college, and really kind of press the final go on their fall schedule. So that's sort of what that actual day in terms of their schedule is designed to be like, given that they already did a lot of that work with their academic advisor in those 2 weeks ahead of their session. And then I believe the last slide is just that after virtual orientation checklist. So these are some of those pieces we would have normally communicated with students that they need to make sure they take care of after they leave us. So things like taking their fall class schedule to Barnes & Noble and thinking through what textbooks they can go ahead and get ordered, sending any final transcripts to the Office of Admissions and directly in the app, telling them how to do that, linking that to the spot where they would submit those final transcripts, linking as much of these pieces as possible in the app and on the website so it's as easy as it can be for students and families. Getting excited for Golden Eagle Welcome Week, like Valerie mentioned. And then from our students, at least, it seems like the carrots of orientation are getting their fall class schedule made and getting their student ID in their hand. And so we feel like we're really confident in how that class schedule process will work. We're still working out some details for how they'll be able to get that student ID made in a safe way. We are working with our Image Center and iTech to have students have the opportunity to send in their photo ahead of time, and then thinking through ways to have students be able to pick up their ID when they return for Welcome Week in a safe way. I know that I have not mentioned much about our family personas. For Southern Miss, at least, we are not charging for a family virtual session, and the virtual family personas that Valerie mentioned will certainly still exist. A lot of that content really will be very similar to the student content. It'll just be more verbiage. Follow along with your students' orientation experience, have access to the resources your students have access to, sort of that kind of verbiage, but really that content, the information fair videos, those orientation presentations will look really similar. We just thought it was important that families still have a spot that they could go to get that information, and back to our earlier point, are going to be in the app and be using it and familiarizing themselves with it so that once they are current family members, they can be transitioned to that current family member persona and get messaging from the university about how they can support their students beyond just the orientation experience.
Thank you, Laura. That's a lot of information. I feel like we asked Laura to help us and she had to carry the heavy load this time. Well, thank you so much for all that good stuff. And I'd like to do a quick little demo. Keep in mind, this is in test and it is in a browser. I'm mimicking what the app would look like on a phone. But I wanted you to see a little bit of it so you could see the flow and what it would look like for a student in case you're not very familiar with how the app works. When a student downloads the application, the first thing they'll do is select a persona, and we're going to direct them to select either a freshman orientation student persona or a transfer orientation student persona. And when they select this persona, they're going to get into the application and they're going to see the actual screen that's going to allow them to start using the orientation content. And the hero image again, the information fair, I wanted to show you when you click it, you get to the information fair. And again, because I'm in a browser, when I click this, it will go to the YouTube channel and it's going to show up in full browser mode, but I'll go ahead and make it into the responsive design size for you to see what it would look like on a student's phone. And they would tap a presentation.
Hi, everyone. My name is J.R. Gearhart, and I currently serve as the Director of Recruitment in the Office of Admissions at the University.
And this is what the student would see when they would tap on one of the information fair. So there's one for every different department, as you can see. We chose the springboard icon look because there are so many. We didn't want the students to have to scroll too far down the page, and that was the thinking behind that. When the students select the before, during, and after, they'll come to one of these styled pages where they can expand any one of these items. So for example, if we want them to log into their account, we'll give them the link to go directly to something. And there are some things we still need to work on because remember I said we're still in test and we're still working on it. There's still changes that need to be made. So for example, the after, right now we just have some text, but we'll need to get some links like in the how to send your final transcript, how to get your student ID made, because that is still a work in progress. We'll still need to make some updates to how the student should actually proceed. We would give them the steps and the links to things so that they could take care of it. And if they want to start following orientation at the university, they could start following in social media and get ready to get excited to go for the fall semester. I wanted Amanda to talk to you about design. I think it's the most underappreciated skill and aspect of creating this. And really, when we start talking about a new area like orientation, the first person who will touch it will be the person who will design the index page, the very first page that a customer would see. And so that's where Amanda comes in.
As Valerie said, my name is Amanda Rester. I'm actually a web applications developer, but my major in college was graphic design. So I tend to help out with the visual aspects of our mobile application when necessary. When Laura first came to us, she mentioned about utilizing the mobile application, as well as making it coordinate with some information that they already had designed to send to students, which is displayed on the screen at this moment. I worked with our creative department for the university and actually received some guidelines as to how they came up with their promotional pieces, on what fonts they preferred to use, as well as additional color accents to use with our traditional black and gold. So from that guideline that I received from them, I was able to take and create images to input into our Mondrian style index template, and just wanted to keep that dynamic angular feel and just brighten it up with some fun colors along with our traditional black and gold, and mainly use the imagery to convey different font choices instead of the standard, web font faces you typically see. Within the application, once the student leaves to go to a separate page, like the information fair that was shown before, I used a springboard template to create that. And most of the icons on that page I either created from scratch based on the information on their website, or they had logos that were ready to use. So that took a little bit of research, but overall, Modo Labs does a very good job of making my life easy as far as uploading images and testing them. For the orientation information, the before, during, and after, those were all collage templates. That way you can put in a lot of different elements. I tended to use the text in HTML blocks to get across the collapsible headers that you saw with the information, so it wouldn't overload the student right away. And I used a hero image just to, again, brighten up the page and bring more color on each 3 of those pages. For most of the images and icon, I'm a Photoshop girl, so that's what I use to export my images. And Modo Labs also does a good job of letting you know what size you can use for each image section when you're in the admin portion. So that made my job 10 times easier. But for the most part, it was a great collaboration between Laura and the creative department and what we've already kind of come up with as a look and feel for our new students. So thank you, Valerie. I'm going to hand it back off to you.
Thanks, Amanda. I'd like to remind you of our transition of personas from orientation to Golden Eagle Welcome Week to new student and retention programs to current student. This is what our Golden Eagle Welcome Week looks like. We used it last year. It was a great success. The students enjoyed it. It allowed them to get information, to follow their leaders. Their leaders do carry a physical flag, so they know to follow the leader. Calendar events, maps, contacts, parking. Everybody needs to talk about parking. Home Sweet Hattiesburg talks about things to do in Hattiesburg and how to find things when you're new to our city. So this is where they'll be transitioned to for that week. It's not implemented into the app right now because it's not that week. When the week comes, we put it in. And then once they leave their Golden Eagle Welcome Week, they come into our current student persona. And here we have Android and iPhone depictions of our current app. You'll say, well, wasn't there one in the middle? The Golden Eagle Welcome Week went to new student retention programs. We're working on that right now with that department. So that's a work in progress, and that'll be completed so that in time after Golden Eagle Welcome Week, we'll transition them in. So we're very busy this summer, and we're excited to be able to do it, because what this means for us is that all new students will now have the app downloaded, and we have a lot of potential to communicate with them for the entire time that they're at the university.
Okay, so what I'd like to do here is finish off this webinar by talking about some of the best practices that you can take and use on your own campus today. And I'm fortunate that Southern Mississippi is such a photogenic campus. I always appreciate those, and it makes just for better slides. And so I'm going to talk about some of the best practices that we have, and also talk about how this might actually work inside of a Modo app. What you're seeing on the right is my iPhone, And what you're looking at is a new refreshed NSO starter kit that we are going to be releasing to all Moto customers within the next few days. We have had an NSO starter kit actually since 2017. It was one of the first big projects that I worked on when I joined Moto back in 2017, and it needed sprucing up. It'd been a few years, so we went back and looked at what a lot of our customers had done in the past in terms of an NSO starter kit, and also wanted a kit that reflected some of the realities today, namely that there may be a distributed or virtual NSO. And so this kit is really updated to not assume that everybody's going to be there on campus, but really be more flexible and take advantage of some of the new features that we've added to Moto 3, like quick polls and the photos module. So with that, the first best practice is really, and this is something I had talked about in the last webinar as well, your app is the new distributed campus. Oftentimes the first digital interaction that a student may have with the school is through the app. And we've actually seen and observed high school students who are learning about schools through the app. This continues the conversation that we were having for the admitted student experience, where you wanted to have that be one of the go-to resources or the go-to resource that admitted students and families had to interact with the school. And this continues that idea that now that those admitted students, who I know you all built personas for, are part of the university, this is the next experience they should see. And as Valerie said, you have the ability to shift the content of a user's persona right in front of them. You don't have to direct them to a new app. You don't have to have them click on something. You can change it for them. And so you can evolve their app experience as their progression makes its way forward, from admitted student to this NSO to a first year experience to, let's say, a sophomore or a sort of a normal current student persona, and then even into alumni going forward. The app is the new campus. So no matter if I am on campus, if I am remote, if I'm going to be remote for the first 8 weeks, if I'm traveling overseas for a year for study abroad, this is the campus. And this app becomes the common thread through which any user is able to stay connected and engaged with your university. The next thing I wanted to say as a best practice is that you really should involve the entire campus in NSO, and Southern Mississippi did a great job of demonstrating that, because in the information fair and all the content that you saw in the NSO persona and through the main app, it's not just IT who runs this, or not just the orientation group that runs this. Everybody has a role to play. And even though there's typically a group that is responsible for pulling off NSO, as it were, everybody on campus is part of this. You're orienting not just to a department, but for the entire campus, even if you're not physically on campus. So you want the entire campus to be represented and participate in this NSO effort. If you look at the NSO starter kit here, we've shown some examples of this. For example, if you are in the health department responsible for coordinating the COVID response for your campus and making sure everyone is kept safe, there are resources that can be provided not just by you, but by all departments that have a role to play here, whether it's something like completing a daily self-assessment, if you need to find PPE stations on campus or follow safe campus guidelines, those are likely not coming from central IT. They're not likely coming from the orientation office, they're coming from somewhere else. And it doesn't mean that you are responsible for creating all this content. You can source it and actually delegate out. That's one of my next best practices, is delegating out to the subject matter experts. You do not have to be the only person who's doing this, nor do you have to be the person who's actually touching this at all. You can create a module like this and delegate it to somebody else in that department and say, go nuts, go do your thing. They are the subject matter experts and they can be trusted to make sure it's up to date, relieving you of that duty and allowing you to focus on really the overall app experience as opposed to every single page, and make sure everything's up to date, especially with COVID. Things are changing all the time. Are we wearing masks this week? What are the guidelines? Where are we allowed to go? Where are we not allowed to go? The different phases for reopening. All those come into play, and you need to make sure that people are not only up to date, which is what the app is great for, but that the information is current. And that's how you do this, by having delegation happen to the people who are the subject matter experts. Another example here, even though central IT may be, as an example, in charge of this overall persona, you might have, for example, other areas of campus where people are maintaining the schedules for where people should go and when. So you can have them actually maintain the individual calendars that feed into this agendas module. And so you, again, don't have to worry about the changing schedules. The people who run those events, they can be in charge of that. So take advantage of that delegation that's there for you. The next best practice is communicate to everyone and everywhere. We talked about this for admitted student, and we really talk about it for every single webinar because it's so fundamentally important for how you engage your users. Moto, of course, has a very robust communication platform called Communicate, and it allows you to engage people through things like in-app banners and rich push notifications and email notifications. And you should, by the way, be using all of those because you don't know if somebody, for example, has notifications turned off, or they're not checking their email, or they're not in the app that often, but they're getting those push notifications. You want to make sure that coverage is blanketed. One thing that we've also added into the platform is the ability to do location-based notifications. So you're actually triggering a notification not to occur based on what persona they're in or what role they have, but based on where they physically are. So think about notifications that you might want to fire as they approach the campus, or as they approach a building, or as they walk into the dining hall, or things where you might have special guidelines you want to make sure people are aware of. Location-based notifications allow you to do that, and the notification appears at exactly the right time that user can act on. So that's why we say communicate to everyone, everywhere. You have the ability to really make sure each notification that is delivered to a person is targeted and relevant to that individual user. Another communication tool that we have at your disposal is opt-in channels, and these are not to be underrated. One of the nice things about opt-in channels is that only the people who actually opt in to those channels get the notifications, and that's great because if I am, for example, interested in campus clubs and student orgs, I can actually read more about them here, and I can opt in specifically to this channel. And what that means is that I will receive notifications about student clubs. And you can actually delegate this channel too to somebody who is in the student activities office or in the club's office. And only the people who are opted in will get these messages, which means 100% of the people that you send this message to want to get that message, and they're going to be glad to get that message. And so I think should be seeing some patterns here where we want to communicate to everybody, of course, the right people at all times. Either they've opted in, or they're a certain person, or they're in a certain place. We should be communicating everywhere as well. Going back out here, the next guideline or best practice I wanted to provide is you can actually really use an NSO experience to kickstart those campus health and safety campaigns. I'm sure that you are communicating in every single way possible, including smoke signals, to all of those incoming students who are coming back to campus about what to do, how they need to wear masks. I know some Moto customers are actually handing out kits to incoming students with things like masks and sanitizers and bars to pull open doors, and that's fantastic. How do you actually make sure people know where to get that, and where do they go, and where should they show up on campus? And movement is likely very different, and where do I go? And what do I need to do to remain safe, both as I come to campus and in the weeks afterwards? This NSO experience that you build on the app can actually help to drive a lot of those and make sure that no matter where people are, no matter who they are, no matter when it is, people not only are notified with up-to-the-minute changes, but they're very easily able to come into the app and find exactly what they're looking for, whether it's things like the Safe Campus Guidelines, what people need to do, things like reading the social contract that they signed and immediately forgot about as soon as they did so, reporting sanitation issues, finding PPE on campus. For example, you can have a map that shows exactly where those locations are on campus if you wanted. Even things like a guide to the new normal. This is actually something we have been doing using or for our Work Ready solution, which we recently released. This is a solution that actually existing customers can add to their Moto app. It's for new customers as well, and the idea is that Work Ready is a solution all around getting back to the workplace or getting back to the campus. And one of the things in that Work Ready solution is basically a virtual tour of the building you're already in, and this can be really easily applied to the campus. Before you even show up, what does it mean to be in the residence hall? What does it mean to be in the library or the dining hall or the classroom or the student center given the pandemic? What do people need to know? And people can actually figure this out and learn about this before they even show up on campus, which I think is critically important. So you can actually use the app to not only inform, but really drive those campaigns, which I know is critically important right now. We talked about asynchronous interactions and everything is time shifted. Take advantage of that. Instead of using that as a burden and as a hindrance, think about how you want to structure your NSO content such that somebody could get as much out of it when it was supposed to be happening, Tuesday or Saturday afternoon on campus, versus somebody who is in reality sitting at home 2 in the morning because they can't sleep, and this is when they decide to watch your content. How can you make sure that those interactions are just as effective? And given the fact that people may decide to watch it again or watch it out of order, leverage that. Use that as an opportunity to refresh your NSO content and think about how people consume it asynchronously as opposed to sitting right in front of you. I would also encourage you to empower your students to discover the campus. This is especially true if they are starting off the semester remote, but they're going to come out of the campus later. Like I said earlier, we want to have this idea that there's not two different worlds. And what I mean by that is that it's very common today for a remote, somebody who's fully remote or they're doing online or distance learning to be completely separated from the community of people who are doing in-person on-site learning. It's really not going to work for this case because these people who are remote now will eventually be back on the campus. And so we want to make sure that we have a single community that is built up even if they're not on campus. And as they return to campus, they can just basically pick up where they left off. So as you see here, there's things like clubs, organization, career opportunities, student employment that can and should be made available to incoming students now, as opposed to when they show up on campus. These are things that they should be thinking about. Clubs and organizations are a fantastic way to build community now, even if you're not on campus. We also have a tool, and I'll talk about this more in a second, called Moto Marketplace, which should be added to an application. And the idea here is that you can use this not only to buy and sell things like a bike or microwave or textbook, you can use it to pay dues. And more importantly, you really use it to discover things that are around you, whether it's clubs, organization, different events, people, your tribe. This is a great way to help sort of find that tribe of yours and discover the campus as a whole. Campus, as we know, is much more than just class. And some of the best memories, I'll bet, for those of you who had the opportunity to go to college, remember, were not necessarily in the classroom. They were the friendships and the relationships and the groups and the friends that you had. And we want to make sure that that can blossom and grow even if they're not on campus. So when they come back to campus, they'll be able to continue where they left off. We talked about this a little bit already, especially from Southern Mississippi, but this idea of having a persona. This could be a persona as much as just a module. The benefit to a persona, well, if you have the administered persona, you can just replace that content with this. It also provides the ability for you to really easily target your messages. So you can use a communicate to send a public message just to the NSO persona, and then everybody who gets that is really about NSO, and it's immediately applicable to them, and you're not messaging all the seniors who really couldn't care less about NSO. So the persona lets you really easily group that content, and then again, you can shift this experience to something like a first-year experience, or even push them into the current student persona once this is over. But the persona really gives you that flexibility. 2 left here. The first one is to segment your user activities with tracks. This is very quick, and I just wanted to show you using our agenda module. There are a lot of events, and they may not all apply to you. It's very easy to set up something where you can say, I just want to look at the schedule for general events that apply to everybody, and only really events that are really for transfer students. Maybe it's a different set of events. Even if they're on Zoom or on MS Teams, it's still events and you still need to have a schedule, but you can have that schedule really focus on specific individuals and what they really care about. And then I already talked about this, but facilitating connections with the marketplace. This is not just buying and selling fridges and couches. This is about making connections and exploring and discovering your campus, as it were, and getting those relationships going now, even if they're not on campus. So with that, I wanted to just wrap up with a couple takeaways for you. The first of which is using a distributed experience for a fresh look. This is sort of the overarching idea that given this reality of what we're having to do, this is a great opportunity to think fresh about your NSO experience and how that should be changed or updated to reflect this reality. I encourage you to think about NSO, or think about engagement really past NSO. What would it look like if you had a year-long engagement, or just for that first year, that really tender first year for students? The retention rate for a freshman nationally is only 75%, and that's even before COVID, so that's especially fragile. And we need to do everything we can to make sure those first-year students stay enrolled and come back for the sophomore year. Of course, like we said, this is a really great way to accelerate your campus health and safety measures that are already in play. You can use those asynchronous interactions to your benefit, absolutely. And then again, your app is the new distributed campus. As I mentioned, we do have a new NSO starter kit. There's a playbook as well that will be available in a few days. We will make sure that all the attendees to this webinar are notified. Customers can also go to iMoto in the iMoto app or i.motolabs.com to understand more about what that kit is and to add it to your own application today. Those who are interested in the Work Ready kit, that is also available as well. And so please contact Moto Support or go to iMoto to learn more about that. We have tons of resources available for you, from things like iMoto on the left, which you see here, training, screen designs, a brand new showcase with examples of what you can do, starter kits like we've talked about today, marketing kits to drive adoption, all these things that are really for you, all around this idea of making you more successful and using the app as a means to do that. Lastly, we really want to make sure that we are of service to you during the pandemic. Please talk to us about how we can help. Motolabs.com/COVID-19 has our COVID-19 resource center, all types of starter kits, webinars, success stories from other customers like Southern Mississippi about what you can do and what people are doing today to battle this. Please ask us how, or tell us how we can help you. We really, really want to help and be part of your transition back to campus, whatever form that may take. And so with that, I want to thank everyone for their time today, and see we are a few minutes over. I apologize for that. I did want to see if we could answer a question or two that might be posed. And if you have to run, I completely understand.
Thank you for all the takeaways, Matt, and thank you everyone from the University of Southern Mississippi too for speaking today. So one of the questions, it's for the USM team. What did your school do for NSO before you had used a mobile app, and what makes having this app and Moto different?
So I'll get started. This is Valerie. Most of our information would be on our website, and I'll have to let Laura talk about how she communicated information to students. Of course, things were in person, and there were probably more paper items that were distributed as well. So maybe that will help with saving costs for some departments in using the application to provide information in the app. And Laura, I'll let you talk about some aspects of what you did before versus what may happen now.
Yes. I know that Valerie mentioned really our start in using the app was last year with our Welcome Week program, which is in its normal state, a week-long, very intensive Welcome Week. And we originally, both for that schedule and our orientation schedule, worked with our Office of Communications to produce these really nice agendas. Well, as you may know, the finalization of so many of those moving parts of that schedule would change up until the very last minute. And so using paper agendas didn't allow us for that flexibility that the app has offered us for both the Welcome Week and orientation agendas, not to mention very costly and not friendly for the environment. So that was really one of the original ways that we communicated schedules about Welcome Week, and just had tremendous success putting everything on the app. We had some backup, more condensed in-house printed paper options for Welcome Week. In the case that we had students that didn't have access to a smartphone or who didn't want to use their smartphone, I don't think we had any students take us up on that offer. And that was going to be our plan for orientation this season. We were going to put all of the agendas for our in-person sessions and all of those personas on the app, and just have some kind of backup copies for students and family members if they wanted to have that piece of paper in their hand. But again, a much more condensed in-house printed version of those agendas, so that we can make those changes up until the last minute. I know our iTech team has really been great around trying to give me access to make changes. I know that I have the ability to do that. I don't know that I personally am really very technologically advanced, so I like to put all the work on them, and they're wonderful and flexible. But I know that I even have the capability to make some content changes throughout our orientation season if I needed to do that.
Thank you so much.
And Valerie, I would like to mention that there was a contract with a company to do a brochure type product that the departments were using, and they were able to end those contracts and thus save some money by joining us into the mobile app. So that was even further cost savings for not having to have two products, but just one product that we're using to distribute the information to students.
How did Southern Mississippi connect the content on their website to the app? Is it through X module, or do they have to maintain it through two different places?
We do have to maintain it through two different places. Oh, sorry, Valerie. We use, I believe, OU Campus is the platform the university recently acquired, and so I have easy access to edit that information. That has been one of the trickier parts, is certainly, as you can imagine, there are lots of different moving pieces with the website and the app, and then printed material. We're still sending a few printed materials to students, and so we have to make sure that that content, even though it's changing and updating, as you can imagine, daily, we're trying to finally land on some final verbiage so that it's consistent between all those pieces that students are receiving.
And this is Matt, just to add on to that, there are some features in the product that allow that to be updated. We do have a lot of customers who will use the website to publish content, but they want that content available in the app, and often the students will prefer it that way. So we have a tool called external HTML. It's a different content block which can basically pull in a specific part of a web page based on something like an ID in the HTML. And as that web page is updated, the content in the app is updated as well. It does require that ID or that unique identifier in the website to be there, but often, especially if we have the website maintainers as part of this, it's definitely something that could be done.
Yeah, and there are some parts where we are accessing information from the web page, so that when the web page is updated, it's obviously going to reflect as updated in the mobile app as well.